If I were to ask you to define the word sushi, what is the very first image that pops into your head?
Oh, I mean, it's got to be a slice of raw fish, right? Like a perfect, delicate cut of tuna or
All
something.
right, exactly. You are almost certainly picturing raw fish. But if you actually open a Japanese dictionary and look up the literal translation of the word, you wouldn't find the word fish anywhere in there.
Yeah, that always blows people's minds.
It really does. The word sushi simply translates to sour tasting.
Which is, one of the most common culinary misconceptions in the world. That sour tasting translation is entirely a reference to the vinegared rice, the sushi meshi or shari.
The rice is the main event.
Exactly. If a dish does not contain that specific soured rice, it is fundamentally not sushi. You could put the most exquisite slice of raw tuna on a plate, but without the rice, I mean, that's sashimi. The rice is the foundational, non-negotiable ingredient.
And looking at the massive stack of culinary history books, FDA guidelines, and market research reports we've gathered for today, our mission for this deep dive is to unpack exactly why that rice is so important.
It's a huge story.
It is. We are going to trace the unbelievable journey of sushi from its origins as a, frankly, pungent, fermented survival food in the river basins of Southeast Asia, all the way to the multi-billion-dollar global industry it is today.
And it is such an incredible timeline to examine, because when you really dig into these sources, you realize that sushi isn't just a story about food.
Right, it's bigger than that.
Way bigger. It is fundamentally a story about human ingenuity. This is chronicle of people desperately trying to engineer ways to preserve food before electricity, and then, innovating to speed up cooking times for a booming urban working class.
And eventually using some pretty brilliant psychological tricks to market completely foreign concepts across oceans.
Absolutely.
So to find the actual starting line for this journey, we have to travel surprisingly far away from Japan. My notes here point us towards Southeast Asia.
That's right. Specifically, we are looking at the regions around the Mekong and Irrawaddy River basins.
So we're talking about places we know today as Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, Vietnam, Myanmar.
Yeah, exactly. The true ancient ancestor of modern sushi is a dish known as norizushi. And it wasn't created as a delicacy at all. I mean, it was born out of absolute dire necessity.
Why necessity? What was happening in those river basins that made this so urgent?
Well, it really came down to the introduction of wet field rice cultivation. In these regions, during the rainy season, the rivers and lakes would flood massively.
Okay.
And when the waters finally receded, an enormous amount of freshwater fish would literally get trapped in the flooded rice paddies.
Oh, wow. So just free fish everywhere.
Right. It was this unexpected bounty.
But
To survive the coming dry months, the people living there needed a way to preserve this sudden massive excess of fish, and obviously they didn't have refrigeration.
And the solution they came up with is just wild to me. The reading says they would gut the fish, pack it entirely in salt and cooked rice, shove it all into a barrel, weigh it down with a heavy stone, and just leave it there for months.
Just let it sit. Yeah.
I have to be honest, if I leave cooked rice and raw fish in a barrel at room temperature for 6 months, my brain says that becomes a biological weapon, not a meal. How did this not kill them?
It sounds incredibly dangerous to modern ears, I know.
Yeah.
But they were actually harnessing a highly sophisticated biological process, which is lactofermentation.
Okay, break that down for me.
So when you seal that rice and fish under pressure, naturally occurring bacteria begin to consume the starches in the cooked rice. And as they eat those starches, they produce lactic acid.
Okay, so the acid is the key here.
Exactly. The lactic acid rapidly drops the pH level inside the barrel. It creates this highly acidic environment that pathogenic flesh-rotting bacteria simply cannot survive in.
So it's like a shield.
Exactly. It effectively creates a microscopic fortress around the fish. By doing this, you could keep fish perfectly edible for up to a year.
That's amazing.
It is. But there is a massive catch to this early process. When a family finally opened the barrel a year later to eat, they would pull out the preserved fish, scrape off all the fermented mushy rice, and throw the rice in the garbage.
Wait, they threw the rice away.
Threw it right in the trash.
The very ingredient that literally gives sushi its name today, the sour rice, was originally just the disposable packaging.
That's exactly what it was.
It's essentially like maintaining a funky, incredibly pungent sourdough starter, not because you want to bake bread, but because the acid in the dough creates a biological shield for a piece of fish, and then you just toss the dough in the trash.
That is a brilliant analogy.
Yeah.
Yeah, the rice was purely a chemical tool.
Mm.
And that is exactly how sushi remained for centuries.
So when did they actually start eating it?
Well, it wasn't until the process migrated to Japan and reached the Muromachi period, which spans roughly from the 1300s to the late 1500s, that we see a shift. The Japanese developed a style called naminare, which translates to partially fermented.
So they just got impatient.
Essentially, yes. They shortened the fermentation period from a year down to just a few weeks.
Okay.
Because they didn't wait for months, the rice didn't break down into a complete acidic paste. It remained structurally intact and edible. So for the very first time in history, the sour rice and the fish were consumed together.
Okay, but I mean, a few weeks of fermentation is still a really long time to wait for dinner. How did we get from a weeks-long waiting game to the instant fresh sushi we eat today?
For that, we have to look at a major cultural and demographic shift during Japan's Edo period, which started in the 1600s.
Right, Edo being contemporary Tokyo.
Yes. The city of Edo was booming. It became a massive metropolis with a population of over 1 million people. You suddenly had this huge, busy, urban working class.
And they don't have time to wait weeks for fish to ferment.
Exactly. They needed fast food. So chefs invented hayazushi, or fast sushi.
And the innovation here was vinegar, right? The sources mention they swapped fermentation for vinegar. But chemically speaking, does adding vinegar offer the same microscopic fortress that lactic acid did, or was this just a compromise?
No, it was absolutely a compromise.
Yeah.
It was a flavor shortcut that sacrificed long-term food safety for sheer speed.
Interesting.
Yeah, vinegar contains acetic acid, which provides that same familiar sour-tasting profile that people loved from the fermented rice. By splashing vinegar directly into fresh cooked rice, chefs completely bypassed the biological fermentation process.
So they just faked it.
Pretty much. They replicated the taste of months-old sushi in a matter of seconds. But because it wasn't deeply fermented, it had to be eaten immediately.
Which perfectly sets the stage for the big revolution. We've got this fast-paced city of Edo and the ability to make sour rice instantly. Who puts it all together?
That would be a chef named Hanae Yohei. In the 1820s, he took this fast sushi concept and created nigirizushi.
And that's the sushi we'd recognize today.
Right. He would take a small handful of this quickly vinegared rice, hand press it into a firm little block, and drape a slice of raw, freshly caught fish from Tokyo Bay right over the top.
The classic look.
Yep. This became known as Edomezushi because Edome literally translates to in front of Edo, meaning the local bay.
And the detail from the culinary history books that absolutely floored me is the scale and vibe of this operation. Because today, we have this intense cultural perception of sushi as a pristine, high-end, hushed luxury dining experience.
Oh, completely. White tablecloths, quiet rooms.
Right. But Hanae Yohei's invention was essentially the hot dog cart of 19th century Tokyo. He was serving it out of mobile street stalls, and the portions were massive, about 3 times the size of a modern piece of sushi.
Yeah, they were huge.
You'd literally walk up on your lunch break, grab a giant ball of rice and raw fish with your bare hands, scarf it down standing up, and go right back to work.
It was the ultimate working class fuel. And they even used a specific type of red vinegar made from sake leaves, which gave the rice a distinct reddish-brown color and a really bold, umami-rich flavor that stood up to the strong taste of the local bay fish.
So we have this massive street food culture established in Edo, but a guy hand-pressing giant rice balls at a street cart is still a deeply artisanal process. How does that turn into the mass-produced, hyper-efficient, globally standardized restaurant industry we see today?
Well, the answer to that arrived in the middle of the 20th century, and it required applying the principles of industrial manufacturing to traditional food. We have to look at a man named Yoshiaki Shiraishi.
Okay, what did he do?
In 1958, in the city of Osaka, he opened a restaurant called Genroku Sushi. It was the world's very first Kitten sushi, which translates to conveyor belt sushi.
The mechanics of the conveyor belt system are so brilliantly simple, yet so disruptive. You walk in, sit down, and there is a mechanical belt snaking through the entire dining room, carrying plates of fresh sushi right past your face.
And if you see something you like, you just grab it.
But the real genius, according to the market research, wasn't just the delivery, it was how they tracked the bill.
Precisely. Shiraishi implemented a system of color-coded plates. Each color corresponded to a different price tier.
So you don't even need someone to take your order.
Exactly. It removed the need for waitstaff to take orders or track items.
Well,
When a customer finished eating, the cashier simply counted the stack of brightly colored plates left on the table.
that is so efficient.
It gets better. By the early 1970s, they had even engineered automatic hot water and tea dispensers directly into the tables, reducing the overhead for staffing even further.
Let me push back on this for a second, though. You take a craft that relies on a master chef assessing the fish, pressing the rice to the perfect temperature, and serving it directly to the customer's hand. Does mechanizing that process and putting it on a literal factory line ruin the prestige of sushi?
That is the core philosophical debate in modern Japanese cuisine, actually. But the market data suggests it didn't ruin the prestige at all. It just splintered the market. Well, Shiraishi's conveyor belts actually saved the original vision of Hanaya Yohei. As Japan modernized and high-end sushi restaurants moved indoors and became increasingly expensive, Kaiten Sushi ensured that sushi remained an affordable, everyday meal for the general public.
Oh, I see. It democratized the food.
Exactly. By 2021, conveyor belt sushi had exploded into a 700 billion yen industry in Japan alone.
But while conveyor belts conquered Japan, spreading this cuisine across the ocean to the west required a completely different kind of innovation. Because a conveyor belt doesn't help if the people in the restaurant are terrified of the food itself.
That's exactly the problem they faced. When Japanese chefs began opening restaurants in North America in the 1960s and 70s, they hit a massive cultural wall.
People were grossed out.
Yeah, Western diners were largely repulsed by the idea of raw fish, but they were particularly put off by the seaweed.
The nori.
Yes, the dark green, almost black sheets of dried algae used to wrap traditional rolls, known as makizushi.
I mean, think about it. To an American in the 1970s who grew up on meatloaf and potatoes, a sheet of black algae wrapping their dinner was completely alien. So looking at the historical accounts, how did the chefs get around this?
There are a few competing claims on who exactly engineered the solution. Many point to Ichiro Mashita at a restaurant in Los Angeles' Little Tokyo in the 1960s, while others credit Hidekazu Tojo in Vancouver in the late 1970s.
Either way, someone had a stroke of genius.
They really did. But whoever it was, the mechanical hack they developed was the uramaki, the inside-out roll.
This is such a brilliant psychological trick. Instead of wrapping the rice and filling inside the black seaweed, they just flipped the architecture.
Yep, they hid the seaweed.
They hid the intimidating black nori on the inside, wrapped tightly around familiar ingredients like crab meat and avocado, and put the white, unthreatening rice on the outside.
It completely changed the visual psychology of the dish. They made it look approachable. The California roll became the gateway drug to sushi for the entire Western world.
And it worked so well.
It really did.
Mhm.
But what's truly fascinating is that this exact realization that you can manipulate the presentation of sushi to bypass cultural hesitation paved the way for the biggest, most shocking deception in the history of the cuisine.
Okay, this is the part of the research that absolutely shattered my worldview. If you walk up to anyone on the street right now and ask them to name the most traditional, iconic Japanese sushi fish, almost all of them will say tuna, and then they will say raw salmon.
Oh, without a doubt.
The bright orange fish with the white fat lines. But raw salmon sushi is not an ancient Japanese tradition at all.
Not even close. It is a completely modern invention. Now, to be clear, the Japanese have been eating Pacific salmon for thousands of years.
Right, they had the fish.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but historically they almost never ate it raw. Wild Pacific salmon is notoriously prone to carrying dangerous parasites. The Japanese understood this risk implicitly, so for centuries, salmon was strictly a fish that was heavily salted, cured, or cooked thoroughly.
So if the Japanese thought raw salmon was essentially poisonous, how on earth did it become the centerpiece of every sushi menu from Tokyo to New York?
It is the direct result of a 1980s Norwegian corporate marketing campaign.
I still can't get over this. Walk me through how Norway gets involved in Japanese street food.
Well, it started in the 1960s and 70s. Norway had perfected the process of aquaculture specifically, farming Atlantic salmon in massive ocean net pens.
Okay.
This farmed Atlantic salmon had distinct biological advantages over wild Pacific salmon. It had a higher fat content, which gave it that buttery texture, and crucially, because of the controlled diet in the farms, it was entirely parasite-free.
Okay, so they have safe, fatty salmon.
They did, and they were so successful at farming it that by the 1980s, the Norwegian government was sitting on a massive, rotting surplus of salmon, and they had barely a fraction of the domestic population required to eat it all. They desperately needed an export market.
Enter a man with a very non-Japanese name, Björn E. Olsen.
Yes. In the late 1980s, Olsens was a Norwegian businessman tasked with solving this surplus crisis. He looked at Japan's massive seafood consumption and saw an opportunity.
So he just flies to Japan.
He traveled to Japan, partnered with a major Japanese food supplier named Nishire, and pitched a wild idea. Our farmed Atlantic salmon doesn't have parasites. It's fatty. It's safe. You should serve it raw as sushi.
And the Japanese market must have thought he was insane.
They absolutely hated it at first. The culinary establishment argued that salmon smelled wrong, the color was strange, and the cultural stigma against raw salmon was just too deeply ingrained.
I mean, they'd spent centuries avoiding it.
Right. But Olsen and his corporate partners relentlessly pushed a massive multi-year advertising campaign. They subsidized the fish, pushed it into the conveyor belt restaurants we talked about earlier, and marketed it directly to younger consumers who were less bound by tradition.
And it worked. They literally brute forced a brand new tradition into existence. It absolutely blows my mind that when you order a salmon roll today, thinking you are participating in an ancient Japanese culinary ritual, you are actually just eating the residual success of a Norwegian boardroom trying to offload surplus fish in the 1980s.
It is a masterclass in global marketing. But your mention of those wild Pacific salmon parasites brings up a very real, very terrifying modern question.
Right. Because even if farmed salmon is safe, we still eat hundreds of thousands of tons of wild-caught fish as sushi every year. If wild fish naturally carries parasites, how are we eating it raw today without creating a massive global public health crisis?
The modern safety net has nothing to do with the chef's knife. It relies entirely on industrial science and rigorous government regulation.
What kind of regulation?
If we look at the FDA guidelines in the United States, for example, there's a very strict rule. Almost all wild fish intended to be consumed raw must undergo a super freezing process.
Super freezing? How cold are we talking?
We are talking about flash freezing the fish down to extreme temperatures, often as low as -60 degrees Celsius or -76 degrees Fahrenheit, and holding it there for extended periods.
Wait, so that fresh sushi I'm eating isn't actually fresh out of the water, it was frozen solid.
It absolutely has to be.
Yeah.
The mechanics of that extreme temperature drop are critical. When you flash freeze fish that rapidly and that coldly, it creates microscopic ice crystals that physically puncture and destroy the cellular walls of dangerous parasites like Anisakis roundworms and tapeworms.
That is so cool.
It kills them instantly, but because the freeze is so fast, it doesn't turn the actual meat of the fish into mush. The European Union has similar mandates, requiring raw consumption fish to be frozen at -20 degrees Celsius for at least 24 hours.
It's incredible. We owe our safety to industrial freezers. But the sources also mention some fish that freezers absolutely cannot save you from.
Yes. You were referring to fugu, the pufferfish.
The ultimate deadly delicacy.
Exactly. Pufferfish don't just carry parasites. Their internal organs, specifically the liver and ovaries, contain tetrodotoxin.
And that's poison.
It is a lethal neurotoxin that causes paralysis and asphyxiation. There's no amount of freezing or cooking that neutralizes tetrodotoxin. Because of this, Japanese law dictates that only heavily trained and licensed chefs are legally permitted to prepare and serve fugu.
And looking at the requirements for this license, it is terrifying.
It is one of the most rigorous culinary exams in the world. Chefs must pass a complex written exam, a visual fish identification test, and a highly scrutinized practical exam, where they must flawlessly butcher the fish and completely separate the poisonous organs without rupturing them.
And the pass rate for that exam is only 35%. I have to say, I am not sure I would ever want to eat a fish prepared by an industry that has a 65% failure rate for its foundational safety test.
It definitely requires a leap of faith. But what is truly fascinating about sushi safety is that it isn't just modern freezers or rigorous chef exams.
Yeah.
Before commercial refrigeration existed, the defense against illness was literally baked into the presentation of the plate itself.
Okay, this is the puzzle I've been trying to solve in my head. If FDA freezers protect us today, what on earth did people do in the 1950s? How did they survive eating takeout sushi before deep freezers were everywhere?
To answer that, you have to look at the condiments on your sushi plate. Historically, they weren't just there to taste good. They were culinary medicines.
Really? Like what?
Take the sweet pickled ginger and the wasabi. Both of these plants contain incredibly powerful antimicrobial properties.
How does that work?
The spicy, pungent kick you feel when you eat real wasabi comes from a chemical compound called allyl isothiocyanate. In a pre-refrigeration world, Eating raw fish carried inherent bacterial risks.
Yeah.
Consuming wasabi and pickled ginger alongside the fish essentially released those antimicrobial compounds into your digestive tract, actively helping to kill off foodborne microbes. They were designed to help your stomach survive the meal.
I love that, although I have to jump in here and break some hearts based on our research.
Oh.
If you are eating at a standard sushi restaurant in North America or Europe or, grabbing a bento box at the local grocery store, that little green paste on your plate is almost certainly not real wasabi.
No, it's really not.
True Wasabia japonica is incredibly finicky to grow. It requires pristine mountain stream water, and it loses its flavor within 15 minutes of being grated. It is wildly expensive.
That is entirely true. The vast majority of global consumers are actually eating an imitation paste made from regular European horseradish, mustard powder, and green food dye.
A completely fake condiment.
Yes, but interestingly, horseradish belongs to the same botanical family as true wasabi and also contains allyl isothiocyanate, so it still provides some of those historical antimicrobial benefits.
Oh, that's lucky.
It is. But the most incredible historical safety feature on a sushi plate isn't the ginger or the wasabi. It is something you almost certainly throw away without a second thought.
The plastic grass.
Yes. The little jagged green strips of plastic grass you find, separating the different rolls in a cheap takeout box. The technical term for it is baran.
Okay, I have always assumed those were just cheap, cheesy decorations, like a way to make a sad grocery store box look slightly more festive.
In their modern plastic form, they're just decorations. But originally, they were highly functional survival tools. Before the invention of cheap plastics, sushi chefs used real, freshly cut leaves, usually from the Haran or Sasa bamboo plants.
And what was the purpose of the leaves? Just a barrier?
Primarily, yes. They were used to separate different types of fish so their strong flavors wouldn't cross-contaminate in the box. But there was a hidden biological mechanism.
Oh, I like where this is going.
When you cut these specific leaves, the damaged plant tissue releases phytoncides. These are naturally occurring, airborne antimicrobial compounds that plants use to defend themselves from rotting.
Wait, so by packing the box with fresh-cut leaves, the chefs were basically gassing the fish with natural preservatives. The leaves were extending the shelf life.
Precisely. It was an ingenious natural preservative technique used for centuries. But as we moved into the 1960s and 70s, commercial supermarkets rose in prominence and refrigeration became the standard.
The refrigerators were now doing all the preserving.
Exactly. The labor-intensive process of sourcing and hand-cutting real, expensive leaves became totally unnecessary.
But people expected to see green leaves in their sushi box. So they just swapped the real functional leaves for cheap plastic strips to maintain the visual tradition. I love this so much. It is the perfect analogy. The plastic sushi grass is a skeuomorph.
A skeuomorph. Explain what you mean by a skeuomorph.
In design, a skeuomorph is a derivative object that retains non-functional design cues from the original, purely so people feel comfortable with it.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, the most famous example is the save icon on your computer. It's still a picture of a floppy disk, even though nobody has used a floppy disk to save data in 20 years. The plastic grass in your sushi box is a culinary floppy disk. It's a design relic of a past survival technology that we now manufacture purely for the aesthetic.
That is a phenomenal way to look at it.
Yeah.
And when you pull back and look at all these elements together, the rice, the salmon, the freezers, the plastic grass, it really brings the entire history of sushi into crystal clear focus.
It really does. Because the journey we've just unpacked from our sources is nothing short of epic. We started in the flooded river basins of the Mekong, where people were fermenting rotting fish and rice just to survive the winter and throwing the sour rice away.
And then we traveled to 19th century Tokyo, where a chef shortened the process with vinegar to feed a booming working class from a street cart.
Right. From there, the delivery was mechanized on conveyor belts in Osaka to keep prices low. The presentation was turned inside out to appease squeamish Westerners in California.
And the core ingredients were revolutionized by Norwegian boardrooms looking to offload surplus salmon.
And finally, the entire global enterprise was made safe by heavy government regulation and deep freezing technology.
It's unbelievable. The next time you sit down with a takeout box of sushi, take a really close look at it. You're not just looking at a quick lunch. You are looking at a perfect cross-section of global history, biological survival, and frankly, absolute marketing genius, right down to that fake little piece of plastic grass.
It completely changes the way you appreciate the food. It breaks down this binary idea of what is authentic versus what is inauthentic.
Exactly. Sushi isn't a static ancient museum piece. It is an ongoing, living history of human adaptation.
Which leaves me with a final provocative thought for you to chew on. At the very beginning of this deep dive, we talked about how people expect precision when it comes to the origins of their food. We assume our traditions are ancient and unbroken. But if a staple like raw salmon sushi, something millions of people consider a quintessential, untouchable Japanese classic, is actually just a modern mashup driven by a 1980s business deal, what other ancient traditional foods that you love are actually brilliant modern marketing inventions just waiting to be uncovered? Keep that in mind the next time you sit down to eat. I have to admit, I fell down a rabbit hole last night.
Yeah.
And I don't mean, watching cat videos until 2 a.m. kind of rabbit hole.
Okay, that sounds a little more serious.
I mean, the kind that makes you question, well, pretty much everything about our culture. I was looking at the bestseller list.
The bestseller list. What were you looking for?
I wasn't looking for anything specific at first, just browsing books, audiobooks, streaming charts, the whole zeitgeist. And I noticed a pattern, a really specific kind of disturbing pattern.
Okay, now I'm intrigued.
If you look at what we consume, what we are truly obsessed with, it is overwhelmingly dark.
Dark how? You mean like grim fantasy novels?
No, I mean specifically focused on the absolute worst aspects of human nature. True crime is the obvious juggernaut, right? We are obsessed with serial killers.
That's definitely true.
But it's not just that. Look at the self-help section. It's all how to spot a narcissist. Is your boss a psychopath? Even something like the 48 Laws of Power, which is basically a manual on how to be Machiavellian.
A user's guide to the dark arts.
Exactly. We are fixated on the predators, and, that observation mirrors the history of psychology itself.
It absolutely does. For a very, very long time, the academic world was doing exactly what the bestseller list is doing today.
Really? I always thought psychology was supposed to be about, helping people being better.
It is now, but you have to think about the roots. Freud, Jung, even the behaviorists. For most of the 20th century, the main focus was on pathology.
What went wrong with people?
Exactly. What goes wrong? We spent decades, literally decades, mapping out every corner of neurosis, psychosis, personality disorders. We developed the dark triad, psychopathy, narcissism, and Machiavellianism because, well, evolutionarily, it pays to spot the tiger in the bushes.
Right. It's a survival mechanism. If I can identify the narcissist, I can hopefully avoid getting my heart broken or my bank account drained.
Precisely. It's something we call a negativity bias. The brain is just fundamentally built to prioritize threat detection. But here's the problem. When you spend 100 years steering only into the abyss, you start to forget that there's anything else.
And that is exactly why I wanted to do this deep dive today, because I stumbled across something that feels like, well, it feels like the antidote.
An antidote to the abyss.
It's like we're finally flipping the script, we're stepping out of the shadows, and we're looking at something called the light triad.
The light triad. Sounds like something out of Star Wars, doesn't it? The light side of the Force?
It really does. But this isn't science fiction, and it's not some, fluffy, just think positive thoughts Instagram quote.
Bro, this is hard science.
This is a rigorous, data-driven personality scale. It's designed to quantify the exact opposite of those dark traits we're all so obsessed with.
And that's really our mission for today. We're going to look at the research that asks us a pretty fundamental question. Can we actually measure goodness?
And not just like niceness or being polite.
No, not at all. I mean, is there a distinct, measurable personality profile for people who are genuinely, intrinsically
well, good? And here's the kicker, and this is the part I want everyone to keep in mind as we go through this. If you're a good person, if you score high on this light triad, does that mean you have zero darkness in you?
Are you a saint?
Right. Or is it, a little more complicated than that?
Well, the answer to that is fascinating and honestly a little bit of a relief. It completely changes how we view human nature.
I am so ready for this. I feel like I need a spiritual cleanse after reading about psychopaths all week.
I get that.
So let's start with the origin story. Where did this even come from? Because like you said, we've had the dark triad for decades. Why are we only just hearing about the light triad now?
It's surprisingly recent. I mean, we're
Yeah.
talking about research that really only crystallized in the last, what, 5 or 6 years?
That recent.
Oh, yeah. The seminal moment, the real starting point, came with a researcher named Laura Johnson.
And this wasn't some dusty old textbook from the 1950s.
Not at all. This was her master's thesis in 2018. It was titled The Light Triad Scale, Developing and Validating a Preliminary Measure of Pro-Social Orientation.
Pro-social orientation. Okay, pause right there. That sounds like academic jargon. Can you translate that for us?
For sure. Pro-social is basically the scientific term for any behavior that benefits other people or society as a whole.
So the opposite of antisocial.
Exactly the opposite. If antisocial behavior is about exploiting, hurting, or just disregarding others, pro-social behavior is about helping, cooperating, and empathizing.
So Johnson decides we need a way to actually measure this stuff. Was she just tired of all the negativity?
In a way, yes, but it was also about scientific completeness. I mean, Johnson and then later a team of really heavyweight researchers, including Scott Barry Kaufman, David Yodin, and others, they realized that by only measuring the dark triad, we were painting a really incomplete picture of humanity.
It's like trying to understand the weather by only studying hurricanes.
What about the sunny days?
Exactly, you're missing the sunny days.
And the important context here is that this wasn't just some random invention. It was explicitly designed as a direct response, a mirror image, really, to the dark triad.
Okay, so the dark triad has its 3 pillars: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy.
Right. So the researchers asked, what are the 3 pillars of the light?
And to figure that out, they didn't just guess. They did the work.
I was looking at the methodology for the major study they published in 2019, the one by Kaufman and his team. This wasn't a survey of like 10 people in a coffee shop.
No, this was robust. They surveyed over 1,500 participants, really diverse demographics. They drafted this massive list of potential light items, statements about forgiveness, trust, honesty, altruism.
A huge list.
A huge list. And then they used some pretty heavy statistical analysis to boil it all down. They wanted to see which traits consistently clustered together.
And when the dust settled, they found three distinct components, 3 pillars that make up the light triad.
That's right. And just like the dark triad, to really understand your own personality, you have to look at how you score on all 3 of them. Okay, let's unpack these. Because when I first read the names of the pillars, they sounded a bit abstract. But when you dig into the actual test questions, they get very real, very fast.
I do.
The first pillar is faith in humanity.
This is exactly what it sounds like, but it is so often misunderstood.
So on the test, to score high on this, you have to agree with statements like, I think people are mostly good and they have good intentions for me.
Let's just stop right there. They have good intentions for me.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here immediately. That sounds incredibly naive. If I walk into a used car dealership or a salary negotiation or, a dark alley, and I'm thinking, this person has good intentions for me, aren't I just setting myself up to be a total sucker?
This is the #1 most common criticism of this trait.
Yeah.
Is it wisdom or is it just foolishness?
Right.
But here's what the research suggests. Faith in humanity isn't about being blind to danger. It's about your default setting.
My default setting. What do you mean?
Think about it this way. When you meet a stranger, any stranger, do you start with a baseline of trust or a baseline of suspicion? The dark triad personality, especially the Machiavellian, starts with suspicion. They assume everyone is a threat or a competitor or someone to be used until proven otherwise.
Okay.
The light triad personality, they assume a basic level of decency until proven otherwise. It's a reversal of the burden of proof.
But doesn't the suspicious person survive longer? I mean, evolutionarily speaking?
Not necessarily. And this is where something like game theory comes in, which is really cool.
Whoa, I love game theory. Lay it on me.
Okay, so imagine the classic prisoner's dilemma or any kind of trust game. If you always defect, if you always betray the other person because you assume they're going to betray you, you miss out on all the massive benefits of cooperation.
Right.
You might avoid getting scammed, sure, but you also avoid building alliances, deep relationships, community,
Right.
all the things that actually help us thrive.
So the person with faith in humanity might get burned occasionally, maybe even more often, but over a lifetime, they build a bigger, stronger network of support.
Exactly. And it creates a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. If you approach someone with warmth and trust, you are statistically more likely to elicit warmth and trust in return.
You get back what you put out.
You do. If you approach them with cold suspicion, they're going to mirror that defensiveness right back at you.
So by believing people are good, you help make them good, at least in that specific interaction.
Precisely. But I want to be really clear. Scoring high on faith in humanity doesn't mean you lack judgment.
Okay, that's important.
You can believe people are generally good while still locking your door at night. It's an orientation toward the world, not a denial of reality.
Okay, that makes me feel better. It's not about being a doormat. It's about starting with an open door.
That's a great way to put it.
Let's move to the second pillar. This one is called humanism.
Now, humanism is a word that carries a lot of baggage, used in philosophy, religion, art history.
It's all over the place.
It is. But in the context of the light triad, it has a very specific, very narrow psychological definition.
The definition in the source material is valuing the dignity and worth of each individual. And the test statement that really jumped out at me was this one. I enjoy listening to people from all walks of life.
And notice the key phrasing there, all walks of life.
Yeah, that's the hard part, isn't it? It is so easy to believe in the dignity of my friends, or people who vote like me, or people who, dress like me and listen to the same music.
Right. This is the difference between tribalism and humanism. Most of us are very, very good at valuing our tribe. We see the nuance and humanity and complexity in our in-group.
Of course.
But humanism, as a psychological trait, measures your ability to extend that same dignity to the out-group.
So if I'm scoring high here, I'm the person who actually wants to hear the story of the person sitting next to me on the bus, even if they look completely different from me, or I can tell we have nothing in common on the surface.
And not just hear it, you value it. You recognize, on a deep level, that their internal life is just as complex, just as vivid, and just as important as your own.
There's a word for that, isn't there? Sonder, I think. The realization that every random passerby is living a life as vivid and complex as your own.
Exactly. Humanism is Sonder in action. It's the polar opposite of narcissism. To a narcissist, other people are basically cardboard cutouts.
Background extras.
They're background extras in the movie of the narcissist's life. To a humanist, everyone is the protagonist of their own movie.
But that seems like it would be exhausting, to care that much about everyone.
It doesn't mean you have to carry the emotional burden of the entire world on your shoulders. It's more about respect. It's about acknowledging the intrinsic worth of a human being simply because they exist.
So you don't even have to like them.
You don't have to like them. You don't have to agree with them. But you don't dehumanize them. You don't reduce them to a label or a political opinion.
That is a really crucial distinction. You don't have to like everyone to score high on humanism. You just have to respect their basic right to exist and have their own story.
Correct.
Okay, that brings us to the third pillar. And I have to say, this is the one that makes me sound the smartest at dinner parties. Pillar number 3 is Kantianism.
Yes, a direct nod to the 18th century German philosopher Immanuel Kant.
I feel like I need a tweed jacket just to discuss this, but what is a philosopher doing in a modern personality test?
Well, the researchers needed a direct counterpart to Machiavellianism.
Right. Machiavelli is all about the ends justify the means. Do whatever it takes to get power. Use people.
Exactly. So they looked to Kant, who is famous for his categorical imperative, specifically the part known as the formula of humanity.
And what's that?
He said, act in such a way that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or in the person of any other, never merely as a means to an end, but always at the same time as an end.
Never merely as a means to an end. Okay, let's break that down, because I think this is the hardest one to apply in real life. The test statement they use is, when I talk to people, I am rarely thinking about what I want from them.
And the source material uses a very, very powerful metaphor here.
The pawn.
The pawn, like in chess.
Right.
Think about how you play chess. A pawn has no feelings. It has no dreams. It has no rights. Its only value is strategic.
You move it to block an attack. You sacrifice it to save your queen. You use it.
You use it.
Yeah.
And if you are high in Machiavellianism, the dark triad trait, you view other people as bonds.
So it's always, how can this colleague help me get promoted? How can this date make me look successful? How can this friend connect me to someone famous?
The person is a tool, a means to an end.
And the Kantian view is, what? You can't ever ask for a favor. That doesn't seem right.
No, of course not. You can ask for favors. Cooperation is human. The Kantian view is that you never treat the person merely as a tool. You respect that they have their own goals, their own autonomy, their own rich inner life.
You're honest with them? You don't manipulate them?
You don't manipulate them to get what you want.
This is where it gets tricky for me in the modern world. Let's talk about networking.
Yeah.
The whole concept of professional networking is, building relationships so you can help each other later, is the very idea of networking inherently anti-Kantian.
That is a fantastic question. And the answer is, it really depends on how you network.
Okay, go on.
If you go to a networking event and you're just scanning the room, looking at name tags, ignoring the people who you think can't help you, while you suck up to the people who can, that's Machiavellian.
That's pawn hunting.
That is 100% pawn hunting.
And I think we've all been guilty of that. Oh, you're just an intern. Nice to meet you. Bye.
Right. But a Kantian networker would engage with the person in front of them, intern or CEO. They're genuinely curious about who that person is. If a business opportunity or connection comes out of it, great. But the relationship comes first. The transaction is secondary.
So it's about authenticity. It's about your primary intent.
It is. It's about not having a hidden agenda. The test item says, I am rarely thinking about what I want from them. Just imagine how different your conversations would be if you actually turned off that little voice in your head that's always asking, what can I get out of this?
It would probably be terrifying at first. I'd have to actually listen.
But the connection you'd make would be real. Yeah. And that is the core of the light triad. It's about authentic connection versus strategic manipulation.
Okay, so we have the 3 pillars. Faith in humanity, which is about trusting the default good in people.
Right.
Humanism, which is about valuing everyone's inherent dignity.
Yep.
And Kantianism, which is about refusing to use people as pawns.
A very powerful combination.
Indeed. But now we have to get to the data, because this is a deep dive. And we don't just deal in theories here, we deal in numbers.
And the numbers tell a very, very surprising story.
Here's the assumption I think most of us would make. I certainly made it. I assume that light and dark are on a single sliding scale, like a dimmer switch.
Turn the light up, the dark goes down.
Exactly. If you're a good person, you cannot be a bad person. They're mutually exclusive.
It's the intuitive assumption. We love to think in binaries. Heroes and villains. Jedi and Sith.
So when the researchers ran the correlation between the light triad scores and the dark triad scores, they must have expected a strong negative correlation.
They absolutely did. In statistics, a perfect negative correlation is minus 1.0. That would mean if you score 100% on light, you automatically, by definition, score 0% on dark.
That is not what they found.
Not even close.
Uh-huh.
When Kaufman and his team ran the numbers in that 2019 study, they found a correlation of minus 0.48.
Negative 0.48. Okay, for the non-statisticians listening, translate that. Is that strong, weak? What is that?
It's what we would call moderate. It means there's a relationship, sure. Generally speaking, people who are very empathetic tend to be less manipulative. That makes sense.
But it's nowhere near minus 1.0.
Nowhere near, which means they are not simply opposites.
So they're not opposites.
No, they are distinct profiles. This is the crucial insight of the whole thing. You are not on a single slider. You are on a mixing board. You have a fader for light traits and a completely separate fader for dark traits.
This blows my mind a little bit because it implies you can have all sorts of different combinations.
Yes. Let's look at the 4 possibilities this creates, the 4 quadrants.
Okay, quadrant 1, this one's easy. Low, dark, highlight.
That's the saint, right? The archetype of the genuinely good person. They trust people, they value humanity, and they don't manipulate.
Quadrant 2, also easy. High, dark, low light.
That's your classic villain, the Scrooge before the ghosts show up.
Oh.
Cynical, manipulative, selfish.
Okay, but now it gets interesting. What happens if you are low, dark, and low light?
This is such a fascinating group. These are people who aren't manipulative. They aren't actively trying to hurt anyone, but they also don't particularly care about humanity. They don't have that pro-social drive.
So they're just disconnected, apathetic.
Apathetic is a good word. Or just very private. They stay in their lane. They don't cause trouble, but they don't really help either. They're just there.
And then the wildest combination of all, highlight and ease high dark. Is that even possible? Can you be a benevolent psychopath?
It's rare because some of the traits are in direct conflict. It's really hard to value someone's dignity, which is humanism, while at the same time using them as a pawn, which is Machiavellianism.
They cancel each other out.
They can, but you absolutely do see people with these mixed profiles.
Okay, give me an example.
Think about a certain type of charismatic leader or politician. They might genuinely have faith in humanity. They believe in the people. They truly want to save the world. That's highlight.
Okay.
But they might also be incredibly narcissistic. They believe they're the only one who can do it, and they need constant admiration and attention. That's high dark.
Oh, wow. That explains So much. The visionary CEO who wants to cure a disease, which is a pro-social goal, but treats their employees like they're completely disposable.
Exactly. We have all met that person. And we get so confused by them. We say, but he does so much good for the world. How could he be such a jerk?
And the Light Triad framework tells us it's not how, it's and. He has high scores on both scales. He's just complex.
Exactly.
This is why I love this framework so much. It allows for the messiness of being human. It's not just he's a bad guy. It's he has high pro-social drives, but low Kantian boundaries. It's so much more precise.
And that precision helps us understand ourselves, too.
Right. I was thinking about this for myself. I like to think I'm a Light Triad person. I mean, I cry at insurance commercials. I trust strangers. But I can be competitive. I can be a little self-absorbed sometimes.
And that's okay. The goal isn't to be perfect, a 10 on light and a 0 on dark. The goal is to recognize which faders are up and which are down, and why.
The researchers also found some other interesting correlations, right? With things like life satisfaction.
Yes. This is the what's in it for me part of the deep dive. Why should you want to be a Light Triad person?
Besides just, being a decent human being.
Well, beyond that, the data shows that people who score high on the Light Triad tend to report higher life satisfaction, better relationship quality, and this is really interesting, a stronger sense of self.
A stronger sense of self. I would have thought the narcissist had the strongest sense of self.
See, that's the paradox. The narcissist from the dark triad has a very fragile ego that needs constant feeding from the outside world.
Right, they need admiration.
The light triad person, on the other hand, tends to have what's called a quiet ego. They're secure. Because their self-worth isn't tied to dominating others or being better than everyone. It's just more stable.
That makes perfect sense. If your self-worth is based on faith in humanity, you're constantly getting validation just by having positive interactions with people. If your self-worth is based on being better than everyone, you're constantly under threat.
Exactly. It's just a more sustainable and, frankly, happier way to live.
But surely there have to be downsides. We touched on the sucker thing earlier. Did the study find any concrete negatives to being a Light Triad person?
They did. They found that highlight triad scores tended to have slightly higher levels of guilt.
Guilt.
Yeah, specifically things like survivor guilt, or what they call omnipotent responsibility guilt.
Okay, what's that?
It's that feeling that if you care deeply about humanity, if you have high humanism, and you feel responsible for others, you carry a heavier load when things go wrong in the world. You worry more about the impact of your actions on other people.
So the psychopath sleeps like a baby because they just don't care.
Right.
And the Light Triad person stays up at night worrying if they accidentally hurt someone's feelings.
Basically, yes. It is the cost of caring.
You know what? I think that's a price worth paying.
I would have to agree.
So we've looked at the history, the 3 pillars, the complex data, but I want to bring this down to the ground level before we wrap up. How do we actually use this information?
Well, the first step is just self-awareness.
Yeah.
You can actually take the Light Triad scale online. The researchers have made it open source.
We'll put a link in the show notes. I really recommend everyone do that. It's incredibly eye-opening.
It is.
But beyond the test, how do we apply this in our daily lives? Let's take the workplace. Corporate culture is so often accused of rewarding the dark triad. The shark gets the promotion.
That is the stereotype. But a lot of modern organizational psychology is shifting away from that. Companies are realizing that dark triad leaders might get amazing short-term results, but they destroy teams in the long run.
They cause burnout and high turnover.
Absolutely. So can we light triad our careers? For sure. Think about the Kantian manager. They treat their team as human beings, not just as production units. They develop their people. They're honest. That creates incredible loyalty. In the long run, that Kantian leader often outperforms the Machiavellian one because they have a team that actually wants to work for them.
Okay, what about in dating? We joked about how to spot a narcissist being a bestseller. Should we be looking for the Light Triad on a first date instead?
It is a much, much better indicator of long-term happiness. And you can look for the small signals.
Like what? What's a tell?
How do they treat the waiter? That's the classic humanism test. Do they acknowledge the server as a person, make eye contact, say thank you? Or do they treat them like a food delivery mechanism?
A pawn in their dinner game.
Exactly. What about the Kantian test in dating? Are they actually listening to you, or are they just waiting for their turn to speak? Are they genuinely curious about who you are as a person?
Or are they trying to fit you into a slot in their life? Like, I need a girlfriend by the time I'm 30, you fit the basic demographics, you're hired.
Oof, That feels a little too real. But that is the ultimate, using someone as a means to an end.
It really is. You know, this whole conversation has made me realize something. We spend so much time and energy trying to protect ourselves from the darkness, from the scammers, the liars, the users, that we sometimes wall ourselves off from the light.
That is the danger of the dark triad obsession. If you stare at the sun, you go blind. But if you stare at the darkness for too long, you go blind in a different way. You lose the ability to see the good.
And the science says the good is there, it's measurable, it's real, and what's most important, it's actually pretty common.
That is the most hopeful finding of all of this research. When they look at the averages across the population, most people skew toward the light.
Really?
Yes. The average human being is not a psychopath. The average human being is moderately kind, moderately trusting, and generally values other people.
We just don't hear about them because average person is nice to neighbor doesn't make the 6 o'clock news.
They don't sell books either.
So true. Okay, let's wrap this up with a quick recap of the big three, the Trinity of Light.
Pillar 1, faith in humanity, the belief that people are fundamentally good, and the courage to give them the benefit of the doubt.
Pillar 2, humanism, the deep recognition that every single person, from the CEO to the janitor, has equal intrinsic dignity and worth.
And Pillar 3, Kantianism, the commitment to treating people as ends in themselves, never ever just as pawns in your own game.
I want to leave everyone with a little challenge, a light triad challenge for the week.
I like challenges. What do you have in mind?
It goes back to that Kantian idea because I think it's the one we struggle with the most in our transactional world. The next time you are in a conversation, doesn't matter if it's with your partner, your boss, or the barista making your coffee, just try to catch yourself.
Catch that internal monologue.
Exactly. And ask yourself, am I trying to get something out of this person right now? And if the answer is yes, just for a second, stop. Take a breath and try to just see them as a person. Shift your focus from what can I get to who is this?
That simple shift changes the entire energy of an interaction.
It turns a transaction into a connection.
It really does.
And who knows, you might just find that by expecting the good in people, you find a lot more of it.
It's highly probable. The data certainly supports it.
Thank you for taking this walk on the bright side with me today. It was a really nice change of pace.
It was a pleasure. Let's do it again sometime.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Go be a humanist today. We'll see you in the next deep dive. Okay, let's unpack this. We are driving deep today into a life that sits right at this really fascinating intersection.
Right. You have early 19th century aristocratic society on one hand.
And the very birth of computer science on the other. We're talking about Augusta Ada King, Countess of Lovelace-born Byron, but known to history simply as Ada Lovelace.
And it's such a fascinating story because if you just, glance at the history books, you might think of her as a footnote. A gifted amateur, maybe, to the work of Charles Babbage. But the sources you sent us, they just reveal this truly revolutionary mind. I mean, we're talking about someone who didn't just understand technology. She really did anticipate the digital age, a full century before it arrived.
And that's really the core of our mission for this deep dive. You've given us this comprehensive set of sources about her life, which was incredibly complex, her collaboration with Charles Babbage.
It was defining.
And intense.
And also the enduring controversy, the sometimes fierce debate about what her actual contribution to computing really was.
Yeah, so we're going to try and distill how the only legitimate child of Lord Byron, the poet, ended up being revered as the enchantress of number.
And for you, the listener, I think the key to unlocking her genius is right there in her own words. She called her approach poetical science.
Poetical science, what a phrase.
It's everything. She even labeled herself an analyst and metaphysician. And that blend, that's what's so crucial. It's this rigorous logic and math, but it's combined with this, almost artistic intuition, this huge imagination.
So it's not one or the other. It's both together.
Exactly. And that's why her insights went so far beyond the mechanical thinking of her time. She didn't just calculate. She conceptualized.
And that conceptualization, it seems, really starts with her profoundly difficult and, very unusual upbringing.
Absolutely.
So let's start there with the biographical context. Ada Lovelace was the only legitimate child of the great romantic poet, Lord Byron.
And Anne Isabella Milbank, his wife, who was no intellectual slouch herself. She was highly educated, very into mathematics.
Right. But that marriage was a complete disaster. It just dissolved almost immediately.
Yeah, a spectacular failure. Lord Byron left just a month after Ada was born, and he died abroad when she was only 8. She never really knew him.
So Lady Byron, her mother, is left as the sole parental figure. And she seems to have had this singular, relentless focus.
A focus driven by, frankly, terror. She was obsessed, almost pathologically obsessed, with rooting out any sign of what she called the insanity she saw in her husband.
So she's talking about the passion, the artistic chaos, the volatility of the poet.
Exactly, what she called the Byron blood. And she had a plan to suppress it. She rigorously steered Ada toward mathematics, logic, and science from a ridiculously early age.
It sounds almost like an intellectual engineering project.
That's a great way to put it. It was a deliberate effort to engineer a logical, rational mind. She hoped that math would be an antidote to poetry.
And yet, even under this super strict logical regime, the imagination her mother so feared, it kept bubbling up.
It really did. I mean, her childhood wasn't easy physically either. She had these debilitating headaches from about age 8. They would sometimes obscure her vision.
And then she got sick.
Very sick. At 13, a bout of measles left her paralyzed for nearly a year. I mean, she was on bed rest, couldn't walk without crutches until 1831.
That's a terrible period of isolation. But you can almost argue that this forced stillness, it gave her mind the space to work.
I think that's a really perceptive point, and you see her mind working most clearly in this project she took on when she was 12.
Before she was paralyzed.
Yes, just before, in 1828. She decided, with total seriousness, that she wanted to figure out how to fly.
Oh, wow. The Flyology project.
Exactly. And this wasn't just a kid's fantasy. She attacked it like a proper engineer. She was methodical.
Did you do?
She investigated all sorts of materials for wings paper, oil silk, feathers. She studied bird anatomy, trying to figure out the proportion of wing size to body weight.
She's applying the scientific method, observation, testing.
Absolutely. She was even planning to publish a book about it called Flyology, complete with illustrations. But here's the part that really signals her genius, that technological leap.
Okay.
She wanted to integrate steam power with the art of flying. She wasn't thinking about a simple glider. She was imagining a powered, controllable machine. That ambition was there from the very beginning.
Incredible. So her mathematical abilities, they really start to emerge around age 17.
Around 1832, yeah. And this talent leads to the single most critical connection of her life. Her mentor at this time was a woman named Mary Somerville.
Who is a major figure in her own right, a brilliant scientific author.
A huge figure. And Somerville wasn't just a tutor, she was a friend, and she was Ada's social gateway into the intellectual elite of London. It was Mary Somerville who introduced Ada to Charles Babbage.
On June 5th, 1833.
At one of his famous Saturday night parties, yeah. And that social introduction is what led directly to their collaboration a decade later.
And you can see this incredible irony here. Her mother's whole project, this mission to suppress the poetic side of her father.
It seems to have backfired, in a way.
It inadvertently fueled her unique genius. It created this poetical science. She didn't get rid of the poetry, she just applied its power to logic.
She unified them. She saw metaphysics and math as, equal tools for exploring the unseen worlds around us.
Which is the perfect mindset, really, to make the kind of conceptual leap that she's famous for. You can't get to general purpose computation without first imagining it.
Exactly.
So she meets Charles Babbage in 1833. He shows her the prototype for his difference engine.
A huge clanking machine of brass and iron.
Yeah.
Designed to calculate mathematical tables without error.
And she was fascinated. But he was just as impressed with her. He gave her that iconic nickname.
The Enchantress of Number.
Right.
And his admiration was clearly profound. He wrote to her in 1843 when she was deep in her work and said, "Forget this world and all its troubles. Everything in short but the Enchantress of Number." It was this incredible working friendship.
Even though Babbage was famously a difficult person.
Oh, notoriously so.
Yeah.
But let's talk about the machine at the heart of her legacy. Not the difference engine, but the analytical engine.
Which was something else entirely, and it was never even built in his lifetime. So why is this unbuilt machine so important?
Because it is now recognized as a Turing-complete general-purpose computer. It had all the essential parts, input, output, memory, a central processor, a full century before it could be built with electronics.
The blueprint for a modern computer.
It was. But the British establishment, they just weren't interested. It was too ambitious, too expensive.
So Babbage had to go elsewhere to find an audience.
He did. In 1840, he went to Turin, in Italy and gave a lecture on the analytical engine. And a young Italian engineer named Luigi Menabrea transcribed that lecture in French.
And this is where Ada Lovelace re-enters the story, not just as a friend, but as a key figure.
Yes. She was commissioned by the physicist Charles Wheatstone to translate Menabrea's article from French into English.
And she did more than just translate it.
So much more. Over 9 months, between 1842 and 1843, she translated it, and she added 7 of her own explanatory notes, labeled A through G.
And we have to stress this point. Her notes were roughly 3 times longer than the original article.
Yeah, this isn't translation anymore. This is deep analysis, expansion, interpretation. She was explaining to the world what this machine truly was and what it could do.
A world that mostly didn't get it.
Exactly. Most people just thought it was a faster calculator. She had to explain the logical architecture, the store, which was the memory, and the mill, the processor, and critically, how it was controlled by punch cards.
Like a Jacquard loom.
Precisely. Which allowed for programming, for loops, for conditional logic. That's what made it a computer, not a calculator.
And her work was published under her initials AAL.
Augusta Ada Lovelace. And the top minds of the day, people like Michael Faraday, they instantly recognized its importance.
So let's get to the most celebrated part, Note G. This is where she lays out the first computer program.
It's an algorithm, a detailed step-by-step method for calculating a sequence of Bernoulli numbers using this theoretical engine.
Okay, so why Bernoulli numbers? What's so special about them?
Well, they're a pretty complex sequence of numbers that show up all over the place in number theory. But the key thing is, to calculate a sequence of them, you need loops. You need iteration. You need the machine to repeat a set of operations.
So it was the perfect test case.
A perfect test case to prove it could do more than just add and subtract. It could execute a program.
And this algorithm is what's often called the first published computer program.
That's right. The engine was never built, the program never ran, but its publication, that's what solidifies its place in history. And it was rediscovered right at the dawn of the electronic computer age in 1953.
Okay, so let's move to what many people say is her real genius. It wasn't just writing the algorithm, it was seeing what the machine could become.
This is the visionary leap. This is the transition from calculation to computation.
What's the difference?
Well, Babbage and most of his contemporaries saw a number cruncher, a machine for arithmetic. Lovelace saw that it could manipulate any abstract symbol as long as you could represent it with a number.
She has that amazing quote about it.
She does. She said it might act upon other things besides number, which is just a staggering conceptual shift.
It's the moment the machine stops being a calculator and becomes an information processor.
Precisely. She realized that if you can encode a musical note as a number or a letter of the alphabet, then a machine that manipulates numbers can manipulate music or language.
And she used music as her big example.
She did. She proposed that the engine might compose elaborate and scientific pieces of music of any degree of complexity or extent.
I mean, that's algorithmic music generation in the 1840s. It's mind-boggling.
It is. And Durand Sway, the historian, he argues this is the key insight. This is the fundamental transition from a machine, which is a number cruncher, to a machine for manipulating symbols according to rules.
From calculation to computation.
That's the line. And she even had this incredibly modern idea of separating the hardware from the software.
How so?
She noted that there was the physical machinery, the mechanism, and then there were the analytical laws, the logical structure. And she suggested that it would take different kinds of minds to work on each.
She was basically predicting hardware engineers and software developers.
It's uncanny. But then right in the middle of all this visionary thinking in Note G, she includes her famous dismissal of AI.
Right, the Lovelace objection.
She wrote that the analytical engine has no pretensions whatever to originate anything. It can do whatever we know how to order it to perform.
So it's a tool. It executes, but it doesn't create. It can't think for itself.
Exactly. It's an amplifier of human intelligence, not a replacement for it. And that idea was so powerful that Alan Turing had to directly confront it in his famous 1950 paper on machine intelligence.
Which brings us neatly to the controversy surrounding her legacy.
It does. We have to tackle this. She's often called the first computer programmer, but that title is, well, it's complicated.
Okay, so let's start with the arguments against. Why do some historians push back on that title?
Well, there are a couple of main points. First, if you look at Babbage's unpublished notebooks from between 1837 and 1840, he had already written dozens of little sample programs.
So that predates her work.
By a few years, yes. So he was technically the first person to write code for the machine. And some historians, like Alan Bromley, argue that Lovelace didn't actually have the technical knowledge to write the Bernoulli program by herself.
And they see her notes as more promotional than technical?
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
As a brilliant public explanation of Babbage's ideas, which he himself wasn't great at communicating. And Babbage himself, in his own autobiography, he sort of claims credit for the Bernoulli algorithm.
Though he admits she found a grave mistake in his version.
He does, which is telling.
Yeah.
But okay, if those are the arguments against, let's look at the arguments for.
Right. It's not just about who wrote the first line of code.
It's about vision. Stephen Wolfram makes the point that her Bernoulli algorithm was actually more elegant and sophisticated than anything Babbage had written. She synthesized his scattered ideas into a clear, coherent vision.
She was the great explainer, the prophet.
Exactly. And Durand Swade brings it all together. He says, look, even if Babbage wrote code first, Lovelace was the only one who saw, and crucially, published the machine's potential beyond numbers. She was the one who made the conceptual leap public.
So her legacy isn't really about a single line of code. It's about the entire conceptual framework.
That's the lasting view, yes.
Yeah.
But we can't talk about her legacy without touching on her personal life, which is fraught.
Very. Especially in the 1840s, there were rumors of affairs, but the bigger issue was her gambling problem.
A severe gambling problem. Which is so ironic for someone so dedicated to logic. She lost over 3,000 pounds on horses, which was a fortune.
And she didn't just gamble impulsively, she tried to create a mathematical model for it.
Of course she did. She formed a syndicate, tried to create an algorithm for beating the odds.
And it failed.
Disastrously. It ruined her financially and forced her to confess to her husband. But it's a fascinating parallel, isn't it? The one time she tried to apply a rigid algorithm to a system full of chance and chaos.
It blew up in her face.
Which almost reinforces the Lovelace objection. She learned firsthand that some things just can't be ordered by an algorithm.
And tragically, her life was cut very short. She died at 36 from cancer.
Yes, in 1852. And those final months were awful. Her mother, Lady Byron, took control again, forced a religious repentance on her.
And there was that final mysterious confession to her husband.
Right. On August 30th, she told him something. We have no idea what it was, but it was so shocking that he left her bedside and never came back.
A life of such genius, but also so much turmoil.
And she asked to be buried next to her father, Lord Byron, the poet her mother tried so hard to erase from her.
Despite all that, her legacy today is just immense. It's global.
It is. A century after her death, the world caught up. The U.S. Department of Defense named a programming language after her, the Ada language. And its reference manual was approved on her birthday, December 10th. The military standard for it is 1815, the year of her birth.
And today, her name is synonymous with promoting women in STEM. There's Ada Lovelace Day.
The Lovelace Medal, university buildings named after her. Even NVIDIA, the computing giant, named a GPU architecture after her. She's everywhere.
So what an incredible journey. We've seen how Ada Lovelace used her unique background in poetical science to transform a technical document into really a foundational text for the digital age.
She took the concept of Babbage's machine from being a mere calculator to being a manipulator of any logical symbols.
Yeah.
That vision, that idea of composing music with a machine, it just perfectly captures her genius.
And it shows that real innovation, it requires that imaginative leap. It's not just about the mechanism.
It's about asking, what if?
So what does all this mean for us today?
Well, this is a really interesting part. Lovelace insisted, with her famous objection, that the machine could only do what we order it to do. It can't originate anything.
It's bound by its programming.
Right. But modern computer scientists, especially those working in AI and on neural networks, they often argue that these complex systems can learn and develop in ways their original programmers never anticipated.
The machine evolves beyond its initial instructions.
Exactly. And so this raises a really provocative question for you to think about. In our age of sophisticated AI, where algorithms are discovering new drugs and writing original music in code, was the very first computer visionary ultimately wrong? Was she wrong about the ultimate creative limits of the machine she helped define?
Did her own commitment to logic and order blind her to the possibility of mechanical emergence?
That's something for you to mull over.